Rex Heuermann, the man that has been accused of being the Long Island serial killer, the Gilgo Beach murderer. Well, we can all but pretty much say he is the Long Island serial killer and the
Mhm.
Gilgo Beach murderer. Same person. Obviously, technically, still innocent until proven guilty. But when you have documents in your basement talking about the murders itself and how not to get caught, and all the images, it seems pretty cut and dry at this point. Shavaun Scott, a psychotherapist and author, joining us to discuss what has been your reactions to these new bombshell uh, pieces that have come out. Two other victims, I'm not super surprised by, but what we've learned in the documents and the data of Rex Heuermann that he was storing. That to me is even more telling.
Very much. Absolutely horrifying. I think this is every woman's worst nightmare, a torture dungeon essentially with broken down obsessive it's like a guide to how to mutilate and kill people. I mean, I went over the documents extensively yesterday and it just made me sick. If we saw this in a horror movie, we would never believe that this could be real.
Mhm.
It just shows this obsessive degree of planning. And I think one of the absolute, I've talked to sadists before, but it is just one of the most sadistic stories I have ever seen. And it's horrifying. How many years has he been doing this, and how many other women are out there? Because clearly this guy was obsessed.
Yeah, I mean, this list, I mean, from what we know now, it now expands his reach geographically as to where he was allegedly murdering these women and abusing them. It also expands it timeline wise. We're going all the way back to 1993 now,
Yeah. Yeah.
which, quite a while, more than 3 decades ago at this point in time. So he would have been in his early 30s, a bit more agile and able to move around. What does seem to have happened from what, if you look at the writings and the way some of these women were found, just horrifically mutilated and ripped
Yeah.
apart. Some of the later victims, though, not so much. I mean, there certainly was a handful of things, but it wasn't as much. I'm wondering if, with age, if he started to do less because it was a little more time consuming or physically exerting on him.
Mhm. Yeah, one of the things that was in the document was that small women are better.
Yeah.
And is that just because they were easier to overpower? And yeah, a guy who's as obsessed as this, I would doubt that he took vacations from it.
Hmm.
I think that there were probably no significant periods of time where he was not engaging in this activity.
What makes someone like a Rex Heuermann exist?
Boy, we would love to know if there's a formula for it. We know that a third of people who have this kind of sadistic tendency, a third of them have had severe child abuse, not all of them. You do find an increase in head injuries, often in early childhood. So, does that change the wiring somehow? But then you've got the DNA component, did they, inherit the tendency to be psychopathic, which means their brains have some differences, a smaller amygdala, and the empathy center of the brain, the prefrontal cortex and ventral media prefrontal cortex, they don't wire up the same way to the amygdala. That's kind of my going into techie
Hmm.
neuroscience there. But there are some differences in the brain, there are differences in their upbringing. Some of them have been bullied, again, not all. So it's really hard to say there's a formula. It in many ways is a mystery. And the other thing I'll throw in is exposure to violent, sadistic pornography, particularly in children. And I think I'm going to have to get on the bandwagon of this because that's what they found so much of was this
Yeah.
torture porn.
Yeah.
And let's say you have an 8-year-old kid and they're sexually aroused 9, 10, 11 years old, and then they're exposed to this kind of porn, and that wires the brain to find that arousing, and in essence it can become addictive, and then they grow up and this is what you get.
God. The writings that we saw from him, a methodical blueprint, basically.
Yeah.
Things in there talking about his checklists and things that he should do next time. Get sleep
Yeah.
before the hunt.
Yeah.
Have a story set. And just like you're writing about a recipe or something. I mean, essentially, it is a recipe for murder
100%.
of what he
Yeah.
was creating. And does someone like that not have the ability to go, this is pretty messed up? Like this,
No.
it's like to them, it is just as interesting as like I'm writing a new chicken soup recipe.
Yeah, I think this is a person who was taking great pride in his work. He saw this as a brilliant, basically theatrical production. This was the work of his life. It will be fascinating to see what they can find that's been documented by him with video or photographs. Usually people do that.
Mhm.
And he had all those, computers and hard drives and all this digital data, and my guess is we're going to find some horrific things on that. It's a sign of someone who was addicted to torture,
Yeah.
and I think one of the horrifying things is at least people who knew him very superficially. Nobody had a clue that this was the secret world going on, and did his family have any clue what went on in that basement? Because there were actually descriptions of having devices to suspend women from the ceiling. I mean, it was
Yeah.
just horrifying.
That's where you go back and you got to start wondering a little bit. Asa, how do you not know that there's this stuff
How
in
do
your
you not?
basement?
Yeah, yeah, and we don't know. Maybe Asa is not the brightest bulb in the room, and
Yeah.
just never went down there. But
There's a
but
lot of
yeah,
reasons. I mean, yeah, I mean, I'm not saying she was involved, but again, to be that oblivious to what's going on
yes,
literally beneath your nose to that
something is
level,
wrong. Yeah,
like, I mean,
something
maybe it
is
was
wrong.
abuse. Maybe she would get the crap beat out of her if she goes down
Yeah,
there. So she just never did. I mean, there's a lot
never
of
did.
logical reasons why she could not, or why she didn't know these things, or just was willfully ignorant for survival. I don't know. But I think there's a lot of questions
Yeah.
that still
I
need
I
to
I
be
call
answered
that
there.
a negative hallucination where somebody just it seems unable to see something that's right in front of them. So it could be that there's psychological problems with her. We don't know yet.
Well,
But the other thing that I thought was fascinating is that he made references with specific page numbers to John Douglas's books, the
mhm.
former FBI profiler
Yeah.
who wrote Mindhunter and several other books. And I've always said that for normal people, we read about some of these awful crimes and the awful murders, and our gut reaction is horror.
Yeah.
But there is a certain percentage of people out there who are attracted to it and find it, I want to model myself after this. And then they use some of this information to become better killers. And
Yeah.
he was clearly in that category.
That's so scary. I mean, I remember like reading How to Win Friends and Influence People, and I took a highlighter to parts because, like, ooh, these are interesting things
Yeah,
to live
yeah,
by.
yeah.
Many years ago, I can't imagine doing that to Mindhunter. Like, ooh, this is. I mean, unless I'm like referencing a case and it's something I'm talking about.
Right, right. It
But
shows that distorted thinking
yeah,
that, this person is a different sort of animal. This is a predator. He is not a normal human being, but he role played. These guys can be very, very good at pretending to be fine, upstanding, normal people, and it's horrifying to get into their minds. I had to eventually, in my forensic work, I had to eventually say, don't give me a sadist.
yeah.
I can handle other kinds of criminals, but sadists, it's just too disturbing for me. I have nightmares at night, and I don't need to do that.
This reminds me so much of Dennis Rader. I mean, it's like another version. Like they could be brothers. I think. I mean, in terms of what they did, the way that they were able to carry on a life of a family, and
Yeah,
nobody's the wiser for all of these years. And that's a good example there. That family there is a good example of being unaware of
yeah,
what was going on around you with this type of a criminal. It's just disturbing how similar they seem to be. And obviously we don't see a lot of these. At least we don't catch a lot of these because
right.
I think maybe catch is the operative word, is because they're so good at hiding. Do you think he ever had a plan here, Rex, that he thought he would get caught at some point, and what to do when that happens?
I think maybe he was grandiose enough to think he wasn't gonna get caught. You know, he had done this for so many years. He obviously was thinking through, you know, washing out the body cavities, everything to remove any
Yeah.
DNA. I mean, it was just, you know, I think this was a guy who really didn't want to get caught and took great pride in his work and thought that he wasn't going to get caught. So it probably surprised him when he did.
And it's someone who did get caught. How does society get in front of some of these monsters before we discover there's this trove of, we know six now. I'm going to guess we're probably in
Yeah.
the teens, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, maybe hundreds
Yes.
at the
Yeah.
end of the day. Um, I mean, he seemed to operate completely unscathed without anybody knowing anything. Is
Yeah.
there a way to ever kind of get in front of this sort of thing, so they're not able to operate the way that they do, and to stop it far earlier in the tracks?
Yeah, I think we are doing a really good job with catching murderers quickly. You know, if indeed Koberger is guilty, if they did not have the forensic evidence and the ability with DNA and genetic genealogy, they wouldn't have caught him. And might he have killed more people? Yeah, in all likelihood. So there were many more serial killers active in the 70s, 80s, and even into the 90s. But once we got DNA technology, we're not seeing nearly as many. It's dropped dramatically. And so I think, you know, let's pat the law enforcement efforts on the back because they are doing some
Yeah.
good. And we've just got to continue to, I think that's the thing about educating people about this stuff. We've got to look closely at people that we may know. You know, now I sound paranoid when I'm saying that, not talking about my husband, but, you know,
Be
I
a
think
fun
everybody,
conversation at dinner tonight, honey.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Can I look at what's on
Yeah.
your computer? You know? But I think particularly with kids, if they're into violent porn, I mean, parents be diligent. You know, we've got to get people early on. If you see red flags in kids and teenagers, call it out, get some help. And yeah, could this have been prevented in some way? We may never know, but my God, at least he was stopped at this point.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for checking out the video. Be sure to follow us wherever you download podcasts, and especially Apple Podcasts, where you can get advanced episode and premium content on our premium channel right there. Also, be sure to follow us on social media so you don't miss any breaking updates on the stories that matter to you most. We're on TikTok, X, Instagram, Facebook. Just search Hidden Killers Podcast with Tony Brueski, and you'll find us right there. Again, thanks for watching.